Sometimes we see things with our eyes and we think, oh, I want that. Sometimes we think, I want it so bad I can't live without it. I know it's going to make me happy. But in the end, the thing we saw with our eyes just might be the very thing that destroys us. Today, we're going to see how this plays out with a man named Lot. So join us. Good morning. Welcome to our Women's Bible Study. We are very glad you're joining us here today, and we're very glad you're joining us online or however you found us. We are working through Genesis, and it's been super, super fun. The picture behind me is actually of Israel. We'll be talking a lot in the next couple lessons. Down here is the Dead Sea. So if you've ever the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. So this is a picture of what Israel looks like. This would have been what Abraham and Lot, who we're studying right now, would have. This is the scenery that they would have been looking at all the time. So let's start here today. On April 2nd, 2001, the worst fishing accident in America in 50 years took place on the Bering Sea. The Arctic Rose, a 92-foot commercial fishing trawler, went down in the frigid waters 205 miles northwest of St. Paul Island. All 15 crewmen went down with the ship. No radio call for help was sent. It just happened so fast. The Coast Guard began their investigation, and once they found the Arctic Rose, it was discovered 428 feet underneath this icy water. The only body that was recovered was that of the captain. But the inquiry drew conclusions on what they think capsized or destroyed this boat. And they went underwater with cameras, and they said possibly what could have happened was that the ship's doors and hatches were left open. Now, because it was always a young crew, and a lot of times they probably had no idea what they were doing, the theory was that they didn't know that you're supposed to keep these airtight doors shut all the time. So because it always smelled like fish and it was disgusting, what they did was they would tie the doors open. And they are pretty convinced that it capsized in less than 2 minutes because once the waves got going and it came in, it capsized the entire boat. So the point to that is this. Not all open doors are positive opportunities. Some are an invitation to disaster. And those people had no idea that an open door would destroy this boat like it did. And so that's what I want to talk about today is sometimes we look at something with our eyes and we think, oh, that looks like an open door. And yet, it just might be an invitation to disaster. Sometimes in life, we're presented with something that looks really, really good. It looks pleasing. It looks like, oh, that's going to make me so happy. And what we're going to learn today is a valuable lesson that sometimes what looks good might be the worst thing that can happen to you. Because what starts happening is we start focusing on that thing. That's going to make me happy. That's good. And so that's what our eyes see, and we look towards that. And when we start looking towards that, what happens is we start turning away from God. We start walking away from the thing that should matter the most, which is God. And so today I want to show you how easy that is to do and what the consequences are for that. And we're going to learn this from Abraham's nephew, Lot. Now, in our last lesson, we ended with Lot and Abraham. They were both very, very wealthy at this time. They had lots and lots of, sheep and goats and livestock. They both had quite a bit of wealth. And the problem was that there was so much that their herdsmen were fighting over territory. So to keep peace in the family, Abraham, the oldest, the patriarch of the family, gave his nephew Lot the choice. He said, Lot, where do you want to move? If you want to go right, I'll go left. If you want to go left, I'll go right. Like you pick the land that you want, and that's where I'll go to the opposite. Now, I don't know why he did that, but maybe it was because, Abraham kind of brought Lot with him. Lot left Ur of the Chaldeans with Abraham, years before. Then he ended up in Haran. Then he left Haran and came with Abraham down into the land that we know of as Israel. I assume that Lot was there as Abraham was building altars to God along the way. He knows God. He knows Abraham's faith in God. I assume Lot heard all the stories that God promised Abraham, this nation, this descendants. And I assume Lot was with Abraham along this entire journey. But the difference was this. Abraham was learning to look up, to stand for his faith, and to know his God. But Lot doesn't seem that interested in doing that. Now, speaking of things that aren't that interesting, I was laughing because a couple weeks ago, Chris, you called me. I called you. I needed to talk to you about something. So I text Chris, and I'm like, hey, Chrissy. I said, can you call me when you get a chance? She writes back, and she says this. I'll call you in a few. I'm in a stretch class. And I said, well, that is clearly something that has never come out of my mouth, okay? I don't even know what a stretch class is, therefore I'm not interested in ever going to one, okay? Or eating healthy or going to the gym, so there you go. But she said this, she goes, the older I get, the stiffer I get. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But I just read this a couple days before where she said this, and it made me laugh. You bend over to pick something up and wonder if there's anything else you can get while you're down there. And I'm like, yep, that's how our life is. So I should probably go to the stretch class with you. But I'm not interested in that. And suddenly I think we're seeing that Lot kind of isn't interested in the things of God like Abraham is. But maybe because, remember when Abraham and Lot went to Egypt, maybe Lot just saw all the bright lights and the beauty and the excitement. And suddenly the desert and the altars of God just started being, they don't seem very exciting anymore. Maybe, here you go, maybe you could take Lot out of Egypt, but you couldn't take Egypt out of Lot. Maybe that's what was going on. And maybe the more he got back with, on these dusty roads, 'cause I'm telling you what, that's hard land down where they were. Maybe he just said, you know what, I don't know, I want to do something different. Maybe I want to go out on my own. Maybe I'm just tired of following Uncle Abe's lead. I want to make a life for myself. Maybe I want to make a life without all this God stuff. A lot of kids do that now. We know that a lot of us have children, and we have seen our kids do exactly what Lot's done. We raise our kids to love Jesus. They turn 18, they turn 20, and they're like, bye, bye. So they leave church, they leave their faith for this glitz and glamour and sin in the world, and they just want out. They want to do their own thing. And so I think that might be what's going on with Lot. But what happens is when they get away from God and they start looking around and seeing things with their eyes that look really good, then they start making really bad decisions. And the consequences of those decisions follow them the rest of their life. And so we're going to see that today with our story with Lot. So let's start here. Lot frustrates me, okay? He just does. In our discipleship group, we're reading through the Bible, and I was sitting with a table, and one of the girls that's there, she's never read the Bible before, and we got to the point about Lot, and I'll paraphrase what she said. She says, what is wrong with him, okay? And I'm like, serious, I know. Like everything in his life does not scream, I'm a follower of God. We don't see that with his life. It actually screams the opposite, like, I'm not a believer at all. And all the things that we read in the Bible about Lot, we would think like, wow, he willingly leaves Abraham for the bright lights of Sodom. It's horrible. He doesn't raise his family to love God at all. He's sucked into the culture. That's just not something that a follower of God should do. So, sorry, I have a hair, which is really kind of funny. So, when God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, God only saves Lot and his 2 daughters. But then Lot's story gets even weirder. Like they go up in the mountains, and the daughters are fearful that they're never going to get pregnant, so they get Lot drunk. Then they have sex with him, their dad. Okay, see how disgusting this is? You're just like, what is wrong with him? And then they get pregnant, and it's just a bad. So everything about Lot is like, you are just a cuckoo-cuckoo to me. But Peter, in the New Testament, writes something that shocks me. And I wouldn't even believe it if I just, fortunately, I believe the Bible is all God's word to us. So I have to believe what Peter says. 2 Peter 4 says this, for if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them in chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who would live ungodly, and delivered, look at this, righteous Lot. That's when you go, rewind, rewind. What? Righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked, for that righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from that day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. And I'm like, what? That doesn't make sense to me. But we got to remember when we read the Bible, sometimes things just aren't the way, sometimes things aren't the way they seem. It seems bad, Lot's life, but maybe something else is going on. It made me laugh, things that aren't what they seem. Sean, our son Sean, had to go over to my parents' house to drop something off. It just dawned on me I need to tell my parents that I'm using them as an illustration. So Sean goes over to drop something off, and he texts my mom, and he says, Manabu, I'm going to come over and drop something off. So this is her response. Of course, Pop and I will be here. We won't be dressed or anything, but you can drop by anytime, okay? So Sean's really funny. Like, he knows what she means, but he writes to me and he goes, hey, Mom, this is what Manabu sent me. Does this mean that they're actually going to be naked when I get there? And I was like, no, it just means they're going to be in their pajamas. They're not dressed. But sometimes things aren't as they seem, okay? Now, in defense of Lot, there are times when we see Lot try to do things halfway good. Like eventually he'll leave with the angels when the angels come to get him. He does warn his children, so there are moments in his life where we do see God a little bit. And as weird as it sounds, he chooses angels over his daughters in this horrific scene. And he's like, here, you can take my daughters and rape them and kill them, whatever, but I'm protecting the angels. And you're like, what? But this is what the weirdness of Genesis. But anyway, so there are moments for Lot that he does, he's not total, nutcase. But I would hate to have a book written about me with the 4 worst things I've ever done in my life in it. So maybe that's what's going on. I really honestly don't know. But 2 Peter says, look at, we'll go back to that, for that righteous man, and here's the problem, and I have a point to this, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. My point is this, when you and I make a bad decision based on something we see, oh, that looks good, that's going to bring me money, that's going to do whatever. When we base our decision on that, we make a decision, now we have to suffer the consequences. And just like Lot, sometimes our soul is tormented day by day. Now, here's what I mean. Maybe you married that guy. You know you shouldn't have. He was way too hot for you to say no. You married him anyway, wasn't a Christian, but you're like, oh, it'll be fine. But now you're married many years and it's not fine. And you're living with a man who his friends like to go get drunk on the weekend and they all watch porn together and blah, blah, blah. And your soul feels tormented every day because you love Jesus, but you've made that decision and now you're there. So you can kind of see, so maybe Lot, was tormented by all the things that he saw in Sodom. How about some people who take that job like, hey, you're going to take that job and you're going to make a lot of money. But here's the problem. All the people there are sleeping around with their coworkers. And when we go on, out-of-town conventions, everyone's getting prostitutes and stuff like that. And you're a Christian and you work in that company and you're just like, my righteous soul feels tormented. So you kind of see how that plays out. So knowing that about Lot, both sides of that, maybe Lot's life is more not so much about the stupid things he did, but maybe it's a lesson to us about this, how easy it is to compromise. Because I think that's what this lesson really is all about. Because when we read the Bible, what we have to remember is that most of the time we only see bits and pieces of these guys, these men and women, their lives. And here's what we need to know. God uses their stories to teach us what to do and what not to do in our life. So, here's the first of Lot's dumb things he does. He has a choice on where to move. Remember, Abraham says, you go left, I go right, whatever. And we'll pick it up in Genesis 13:10. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plains of Jordan, Then it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the gardens of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Now I put a map in there for you. Here's the map right here. I want you to see this. Behind me is the Dead Sea, so or the Salt Sea. Either one, you can interchange that. That's that blue right there. Abraham will eventually land way at the top left up there at Hebron. But you can kind of see down there, Sodom and Gomorrah, Zoar, everything's down the southern part of the Dead Sea, which is right here. So you kind of get a picture of what's going on here. We'll go back to verse 10, and Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan. Now, for most people, they probably don't know this, but there's the Dead Sea right there in the middle. To the left of that is Israel. To the right of that is Jordan. Okay, so what he's doing is he's lifting his eyes up and he's seeing out over the Dead Sea, and he sees Jordan, and he sees the plain of Jordan. And I'm going to assume it's something like this. So you can see all the desert here. This is what this is back here. But then it's almost like he looked out and he saw all the greenery and these plains, and they're like, oh, I like that. I was laughing. I was trying to figure out, where exactly Sodom was in the old, back in Bible days. So I typed in, I Googled, modern day Sodom. I knew what I was looking for. What came up was Las Vegas. I was like, yeah, that is probably true. So here you go. Lot lifted his eyes. Here's where we're going to get ourselves in trouble. The first thing he does is this. Lot looked. He looked. He didn't keep his eyes on God. He didn't pray. He didn't keep his eyes on Abraham's altars. He didn't realize that God had a purpose and plan for his life. He just looked. And he saw, oh, there's some beautiful greenery and well-watered land, and I need that. And what we see is Lot lived by what he saw with his eyes. There wasn't any God involved in anything. It was just like, oh, that looks good for me. We see it all through the Bible. Think about Eve. She looked at this tree and she sees the fruit and she's like, ooh, that looks good. I want that. And we know how that ended. Think of David and Bathsheba. Look at this. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he what? Saw with his eyes a woman bathing. And she was very beautiful. See what happens with our eyes when we start looking at things? We see another story about Achan in the Old Testament. At this particular time, Israel's being punished because they just won't turn to God and they won't live for God. And so this guy, he does something really stupid, but it's because he looked with his eyes. He sees something and he steals it and he hides it in his tent. And God's like, no, we're not doing that. But look what he saw. When I saw the spoils, a beautiful Babylonian garment, 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. And it destroyed Israel at this particular time. So it's just this idea of what we're looking at and thinking, that might make me really, really happy. And I bet if we looked at our own lives, we could see that we've made choices like that. But here's the problem. Everything starts here. 1 John 2 says this, do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, and then he tells us, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes. So what we see and what we want is really, really important to guard our eyes. But for Lot, he saw greenery. He saw well-watered land, perfect for grazing his herds. Plus, he's near Sodom. He would be close to the city, closer to Costco, closer to the movie theaters, apparently. I don't know. But what we learn about Lot is this. Lot really cared only about himself. It never dawned on him to care more for Abraham. He should have said to his uncle, Abraham, absolutely not. I would never take the best land. You brought me to this land. I'm giving you first dibs on what you want. And he never did that. Instead, he looked with his eyes, he saw something, and it's just a lesson for us that our eyes can deceive us. So not only does he look, now look what he does. Lot left. He left Abraham. He left the tents. He left the altars. Verse 11, then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. They separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. He leaves. He leaves this amazing man of faith to go out on his own. And I wonder if Abraham ever had that conversation. You know how we have those conversations with our kids, like, what is wrong with you? Don't do that. Why in the world would you take your wife and your children and move so close to Sodom, a place that's so evil and wicked? Like, why would you do that? And maybe Lot would reply, pretty much probably what our kids would reply. His would look like, come on, Uncle Abe. It's no big deal. Hey, we're closer to the kids' schools. We're closer to the soccer fields, closer to the restaurants. And besides, I can get a good job in Sodom. I can make a lot of money in Sodom. Besides, I'm kind of tired of living in the tents. I'm just closer to, here you go, everything but a place of worship. Everything. Lot moved closer to everything except God. And the closer he got to Sodom, the farther he got from God. And the closer he got, this is what he does. Lot pitched his tent. He pitched his tent. He set up camp there. He brought his family to this place. And that was not a good idea. And the reason why is because, here you go, but the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. Not just sinful against the Lord. Not just wicked, but extremely wicked. And everything that he saw, Lot saw in Sodom, should have made him stop and say, wait, this isn't good. I need to get back to Abraham, and I need to get back to God. But he never did. And I don't know if he didn't realize it, didn't care. I don't know. But here is a lesson for us that we learn from him. It makes a big difference where we pitch our tent. It just really does. There was a pastor telling a story of a student that he knew that got himself into a really moral problem. And the pastor's like, how could he do that? And someone said this to the pastor. No one ever quite intends to be that kind of person. His trouble was that he faced the wrong direction. He simply pitched his tent towards Sodom. Another pastor wrote that many years he'd seen men who decided to take jobs to get more money. And they would uproot their families from these churches where these kids are flourishing and they're learning about Jesus, they're growing in their faith, and dad uproots them and takes them to another place, and then they can never build their spiritual roots again. It's just too late. Dad's off making money, and now it's like, oh, whatever. They made a decision, not based on God, but on the choice of money. Here's what I say. Watch what you do. Watch what choices you make. Watch where you pitch your tent. Because so often we choose things like, oh, I need to move because I need to be closer to this school or that neighborhood or that city or my friends are over here. Maybe it's based on money or better soccer teams or the grocery stores down the street, whatever. But here's the thing. We base everything else and God last. God should always be first. Is there a good church nearby? Is there a good youth group? Is there a good Bible study? But the problem with us is that we go, oh, well, we'll find one. I'm sure we'll find one when we get there. So it becomes last instead of first. When our son decided to move to Texas, he's literally moving because of a specific church and a specific Christian school. That's it. That's his motivation. So as I was putting this lesson together, I'm sitting at Makayo's. I always have this one little place I sit at Makayo's. I call it my Makayo's office, okay? So I'm working on my lesson, and I was working right through this whole thing, and I started crying. I was sitting there just like sobbing at the table, and I felt so sad because I'm like, suddenly I realized like Mike is moving. Like he's moving away. We've never had a child do that before. So I texted Shayla, and I was like, just want you to know I'm so sad. I'm happy for you, but I'm really sad. So Micah calls me. And I said to him, I said, Micah, I just want you to know I'm working on this lesson with Lot. And I said, I want you to know I'm so incredibly proud of you. I said, you are doing what Lot should have done, which is cared more for the things of God than work or status or money or even family. And then I went home and put a new hormone patch on, so I wouldn't cry anymore. So that was that. But following God and growing in our faith, honestly, has to be first on our list. Everything revolves around that, not the other way around. So Lot saw with his eyes, and he made a choice based on what he saw, and he pitched his tent there. I was thinking about this. Think about all the people who are in prison. Think of all the people who got in trouble and landed there because they pitched their tent too close to Sodom. Think of the families torn apart by adultery because someone pitched their tent too close to Sodom. Think about the college student who left for college. They had this great faith, but then they pitched their tent too close to Sodom, maybe in a fraternity or a sorority, and they got sucked into it. Think of the Christian girl who started dating the non-Christian guy, and suddenly she sees what she wants with her eyes, and she pitches her tent in Sodom. And everything goes downhill from there. Sodom looks fun. Sin looks fun. Sin is fun, okay? If you're not doing it, having fun, you're not doing it right, apparently. But here's the deal. That's Satan's tactic. Look over there, see over there, move over there. Do anything to get away from God. But in the end, it will destroy you. I want to read Proverbs 7. This is so interesting. Proverbs 7, it's like wisdom is talking. Watch this. For at the window of my house, I looked through my lattice. I saw among the simple, I perceived among the youths, a young man devoid of understanding, passing along the street near her corner, and he took the path to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, in the black and dark night, and there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. She was loud and rebellious. Her feet would not stay at home. At times she was outside, at times in the open square, lurking at every corner. So she caught him and kissed him. With an impotent face, she said to him, I have peace offerings with me today. Today I paid my vows, so I came out to meet you diligently to seek your face, and I have found you. I have spread my bed with tapestry, colored coverings of Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloe, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love until morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He's taken a bag of money with him, and he will come home on the appointed day. With her enticing speech, she caused him to yield. With her flattering lips, she seduced him. Immediately when he went after her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of the stocks, till an arrow struck his liver, as a bird hastens to the snare, he did not know it would cost him his life. You can put any kind of temptation in there like that. And people just succumb to it, and they don't know the devastation that it causes in their life. So we saw that Lot, he left, he looked, he left, and now here's what he does. Lot lingered. He pitched his tent, and then he lingered in town. He probably started off spending a day, hey, honey, I'm just going to go grocery shopping in Sodom. And then he was like, oh, wait a minute, Sodom looks fun. I think the next day I'm going to go grocery shopping and I'm going to go see a movie. And I'm going to go to the dancing hall or whatever. Like suddenly he starts lingering around the town. And here's what I realized. The longer you stay, the more callous you become. That's just the way it is. The longer you hang out with people who sin and do stupid stuff, the easier it is, you just become callous to it. It's like if you remember the first time you ever heard a movie with a cuss word in it, you're like, oh, why would they say that on TV? Nowadays, oh, for the love. If they don't say 3 or 4 words and 2 of them being the F word, you're like, what's wrong with this show? Like, it's horrifying. But see, we've become so callous to it. It's become normal. What about the first time you ever saw 2 girls or 2 guys kissing on the big screen? I was enraged. What in the world is that? Now, if that's not in every movie or every TV show, this generation just thinks it's normal. We stopped watching Chicago Fire just because of the homosexuality they brought in. And then we've watched NCIS, like 17 seasons of it with Gibbs and that whole group. And the reason we watch it is because there's never anything in there like that. Last week, they introduced it. I was like, I'm trying to figure out who I can write to say, stop it. Like, we still do want to watch shows that aren't talking about stuff like that. But the problem is, we've become callous to that. Now when it's on, I'm just like, oh yeah, it's just the way the world is. Our righteous soul should be tormented, actually. So when we linger around sin too long, we get so accustomed to it and then we just accept it. And I think that's what happened to Lot. The longer he was away from Abraham and Abraham talking about God and how awesome God was, the more normal sin became. And for Lot, the lights of Sodom were too bright. Surrounding himself with sin and sinful people, instead of surrounding himself with godly people and the things of God. It's a reminder what Proverbs says. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it. Don't go in on it. Turn away from it and pass. Pass on. That's what he said. Like, if you want to avoid this, that's what we have to do. And Lot didn't do that. He looked, he lingered, he left, and then he moved there. Look what happens. He actually moved there. He lived there now. Genesis 14:12, we'll see this, I think it's next lesson. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. So now he moves into Sodom with his wife and his kids. And he knew the dangers. He knew the sexual perversion in this town. He knew what his kids would be faced with every single day. And if just that wasn't enough, now he digs his heels in. He's going to be part of the town. Look at what happens in Genesis 19:1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Guess who sits in the gates? Leaders, elders, politicians, men of prominence. Lot wasn't just looking at Sodom from a distance or pitching his tent. He was not only living in the city, but he was now part of the city. In our discipleship group, we have to memorize a verse each week, and the first verse I memorized was Psalm 1. And the reason why is because I have a friend, and she always gets in trouble when she hangs around this one group of people. And so I told her, I said, I memorized this verse for you because it's just a reminder that we can start compromising when we start doing what Psalms 1 says not to do. He says this, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked." Lot was walking in the counsel of the wicked. God says you're not going to be blessed if you do that. I imagine him walking around. Nor, what's the next one? Standing in the way of sinners. Do you just imagine Lot standing around talking to all the guys, nor sit in the seat of scoffers? He now has a seat in the middle of the city. The writer of Psalms, in contrast, says, you don't want to do that. That's not the way to live. This is how we should live. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on that, he meditates day and night. There's a huge contrast between the two. The very last verse says, verse 6, he says, "For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." And we know exactly what happens to Sodom and Gomorrah. God will rain fire down onto them and destroy both cities completely. And he'll wipe out everyone except Lot and 2 of his daughters. And so what Lot tells us and shows us is this: it really is a slow fade. It just is. And it starts with just small little choices to move just a little closer to Sodom, a little closer to that flirting, a little closer to that drug, a little closer to that drink. And then eventually we find out we're just living there. We're addicted, we've destroyed our marriage, whatever it is. I think it's a warning in the Bible for this. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. But here's the problem with Christians. We play these games. We say like, I know how far I can go. I can stop. I know when too much is too much. I can stop. I'm not going to stay very long. Some foolishly think, you know what? I'm going to take my Christian faith into this really evil world and I'm going to be a missionary. I'm going to missionary date. I'm going to date someone who's not a Christian because he's super hot, and you know what? And then I'm going to lead him to Jesus. It doesn't happen that way. Speaking of dating, this is kind of funny. Dusty, he's our 20-something-ish. He's in college, okay? He comes home from college, and he says, "Mom, I got a note on my truck today." He goes and said, "Hey, you're really cute. Here's my phone number. Text me sometime." Okay? So he's telling me this. This just happened a couple weeks ago. And I looked at him, I go, "Who is it?" And he goes, "I don't know." He goes, "But this is how weird our culture is. I was wondering if it was the girl that sits next to me on the left or the guy that sits next to me on the right? He's like, Mom, I don't know anymore. Like, is it the gay guy that keeps looking at me in class, or is it the girl, I don't know anymore. But that just made me laugh. But we missionary date. We missionary social drink. I'm going to go to that party and I'm going to drink with those people and tell them all about Jesus. Missionary business venture. I don't know. I'm going to be in a business venture, but then suddenly something starts happening. You drink too much, you go too far, and now you're lured into a place that's completely away from God. There's an old story about a man who tried to save the city of Sodom from destruction by continually warning the citizens, like, stop it, don't do that, you can't do that. And every day people ignored him as he tried to shout out to them to repent. Someone came up to him one day and said, why do you bother? You can't change them. And the man replied this. He said, maybe I can't, but I still shout and scream to prevent them from changing me. I love that. We need to be constantly reminding ourselves what God says will harm us. Because so much of us, the sin that can come into our lives could have been prevented if we just would have remembered this overarching principle of, wow, watch what you do. Watch what choices you make and watch where you pitch your tent. Because that's what the story of Lot reminds us of. Do not move to the city for wrong reasons. Don't take the job for wrong reasons. Don't let your spouse take a job for the wrong reasons. Don't send your child to college for the wrong reasons, like, oh, they're going to get a good education and we got a scholarship. Don't do that. Send them to a college where they know that the minute they get there, their faith is not going to be destroyed by their professors who don't believe in God. It's hard enough for Christian kids nowadays, and these are kids who are in serious Bible teaching churches. And they know the Bible, and they go off to these liberal colleges, and they walk away from their faith. Let's not put our kids in that kind of a environment. I think the story in the Bible is really a warning. Think twice before going to Sodom or sending your spouse or child to Sodom, because we don't want to do that. Make God your highest priority in every decision. Care more about your family's spiritual well-being over their financial well-being or their educational well-being. Please do not wait until it's too late. Don't wait until your kids have been corrupted by other kids. Don't wait to take your kids to church until they're older. Do it while they're young. Don't wait to talk to your kids about Jesus. Don't wait to teach them a biblical worldview. Because here's what I say, the storm is coming. The culture is winning. The truth is being watered down. And we have to be proactive. I want to end really quick here with Abraham, because Lot lifted his eyes and he saw something different than Lot did. Look at verse 14. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now. He's saying, lift your eyes, not to look at what's pleasing out there, but look up, Abraham. Look up to me. Lift up your eyes and look from this place where you are. Let's see if I got that right. Lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, that your descendants also could be numbered. He says, arise, walk in the land through its length and its width. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. I'll put that map back up there. You see Hebron up there? That's where he ended up. Bottom down there, you see Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where Lot ended up. I think the moral to the story today is this. Abraham's life was God-focused, not world-focused. When he looked out, he wasn't looking out at something that's going to please me, make me happy. It's more like, what can I look out and see what I can do for God? The lesson is this. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Lot was devoured. Lot had a choice, just like you and I do. Pursue God, pursue the world. And he chose wrong, and he actually will eventually be devoured even worse than what we see. Because this is what we need to remember. Not all open doors are positive opportunities. Some are an invitation to disaster. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for Lot's life. Sometimes he makes us crazy, but God, I pray that we can look past his craziness to see the deeper lessons that he teaches us. God, helps us to look out, and when we look out, start looking at life and looking at what we see through your eyes and not through the eyes of what we think is going to make us happy or give us what we want. God, thank you for all you do. Thank you for these stories. Help it to change our life. In Jesus' name, amen.